While Mario Sunshine does have some glitches, it remains a relatively unbroken game with no skips that let you get around the minimum requirements to beat it. There are some skips that let you sequence break, but opening Corona Mountain to fight Bowser requires clearing the Shadow Mario level in each world, which is always the 7th level, so a significant portion of the game still needs to be played. However, all of this changed in the summer of 2024 when a skip was found that warped you to the final area just before the boss. But the skip wasn't easy, and the first successful run using it was an hour slower than the any % speedrun. Despite this roadblock, players worked towards bringing the time down, and as we'll see, they turned it into the most time-saving skip the game has. But to understand how we got here, we need to go back to 2020. Before we get into the Mario Sunshine skips, we need to talk about this video's sponsor, Control. Let's face it, sometimes during gaming sessions we will eat absolute garbage when we get hungry. This isn't healthy, but with Control, you can ditch the snacks and fast food for their fantastic meal replacement shakes. These shakes can be prepared in record time and they keep you full for hours, so they're great for weight loss. And if you want something solid, the protein bars have you covered, as they come with real pieces of cookie dough or marshmallows, so not only are they quick, but they also pack a great taste. If you want a healthy quick meal replacement, go to drinkcontrol.com/Abyssoft and use code Abyssoft to get 10% off your order. And if you're wondering who this little guy is, that's my avatar on Moonbounce, a Chrome extension that lets you hang out, play minigames, and collect rewards while surfing the web. And for a limited time, you'll be able to collect cereal pieces on Moonbounce to unlock discounts of up to 20% off on Control. So if you want 10% off Control, click the link below. And if you want even more potential savings, use Moonbounce on the Control webpage. And for an hour after this video goes live, I'll be hanging out with you on Moonbounce on the Control page. And with that, let's get back to the glitches in Mario Sunshine. It had been known for a while that the cutscene system in Sunshine had a flaw that caused the game to crash if the Shine Get cutscene played during another cutscene. This was thought to be a 100% occurrence, but in April of 2020, Noki Doki would explore the cutscene system and got a better understanding of what was going on. In memory, there are a total of 8 slots that the game allocates for cutscenes that need to be played, numbered from 0 to 7. For this list, the game keeps track of 2 values, the slot number of the last cutscene that was started, and the slot number of the last cutscene that ended, which we'll call LCS and LCE for this video. When a cutscene starts, the value of the LCS is increased by 1, and if it ever goes beyond 7, it cycles back to 0 where the new cutscene gets loaded. For the LCE, as soon as a cutscene ends, it increases, so let's look at an example. Here are 2 cutscenes that need to be watched. The LCS is increased twice while these cutscenes are playing out. Once the first cutscene is finished, the LCE is then increased by 1. And when the final cutscene is finished, it reaches the same value as the other variable, so the game knows it has no more cutscenes to play. This should mean that anytime the 2 values aren't equal, that there are more cutscenes to play. So why does triggering a Shine Get cutscene while another is playing cause a crash? For some strange reason, when a Shine Get cutscene ends, it causes the LCE to increment twice, so you end up with a game state where the LCE is larger than the LCS, and since the values can loop, the game thinks it has 7 more cutscenes to play. Since there aren't any legitimate cutscenes to play, the game ends up executing garbage data, which results in a crash. But Noki Doki figured out that if you fill all the slots in the cutscene list, the data gets left in them after they've been played. So if you execute a Shine Get cutscene during another cutscene, instead of executing garbage data, the game ends up playing cutscenes you've previously watched. In this example, since a Shine Get cutscene was played first, the screen fades out, so you won't see the other cutscenes playing. But if you wait long enough, you'll see the save box pop up and can continue the game. So, it appeared the mystery was solved, with Noki Doki naming this exploit Cutscene Underflow. But he wasn't done here. He also wanted to explore the garbage data produced by Cutscene Underflow when you didn't fill the list with actual cutscenes, and what he found was incredible. A question formulated in Noki Doki's mind: what would happen if a cutscene from one area was played in another? To answer this, he set up the cutscene tracker to be filled with cutscenes from one level, then went into another level and triggered them. And the result was that in some cases they played, and in others they ended instantly. The reason some cutscenes were ending was because there was other data associated with them that wasn't getting preserved between areas. So if a cutscene needed special instructions telling the camera what to do, and those got deleted moving between levels, it would end when it started since it was missing key data. But a shine spawn cutscene was an exception. Shine spawn cutscenes have certain functions that run even if the camera data associated with them has been deleted, and one of these functions pertains to data tied to the shine that's spawning. But since we're in another area, that specific shine is never spawned, which results in something called a stale reference. In the code, there are variables called pointers that store the memory address of objects, but if the object they are referencing gets deleted while the pointer is still referencing it, the result is a stale reference. On their own, stale references can cause problems, but things get very interesting if you load something into memory where the deleted object was, as the pointer will interact with whatever object is placed there. Let me know what you think Noki Doki is going to use in the stale reference down below, because before we get to it, there are a couple of problems he had to solve. First, switching between levels normally by exiting and re-entering and certain types of cutscenes are off limits, as a full motion video or FMV and episode selection cutscene will both overwrite whatever cutscenes are loaded into the cutscene list, which limits where cross-level underflow can be used. On top of this, whenever you transition to another area through any means, the cutscene count resets to 0 even if you've stored cutscenes in the list. This doesn't mean they're deleted, however, but since you need to store at least 2 cutscenes to trigger underflow, it does mean that you'll need to trigger at least 2 cutscenes in whatever initial area you're spawning the shine in. Since once you start setting up underflow in the second area, the first 2 cutscenes will be overwritten, so the shine get cutscene needs to be further down the list. For the task, he went to Noki Bay and started the Eelymouth's dentist shine, as it has an easily repeatable cutscene where you get swallowed by Eelymouth. So once he's done this twice, he'll defeat the boss and spawn the shine. This makes his total number of cutscenes 4, so he quits out to the plaza, then takes a death to load a different plaza state, as deaths and level intros don't count as cutscenes, so they won't overwrite any of the data in the cutscene list. Now that he has 4 cutscenes from Noki Bay in the list, and the count for both variables is set to 0 since he did a transition, he'll need to play 2 cutscenes, then trigger a shine get during the second cutscene to enable underflow and get the shine spawn with the stale reference to play. And how he does this is incredible. First, he spawns a blue coin which counts as 1 cutscene, but after clearing the graffiti, he places a barrel next to it. This is because if you don't collect a blue coin, it will despawn and the graffiti will reappear, but if a barrel is touching it, the graffiti will be destroyed, which triggers the blue coin cutscene again. While he's waiting for the graffiti to respawn, he clips into the bell tower that you normally need the turbo nozzle for and touches the shine to start a shine get cutscene. But before that cutscene starts, the graffiti respawns and gets broken by the barrel, so during the blue coin cutscene, the shine get starts to play, which as we know is the trigger for underflow. Okay, so this gets the shine spawn cutscene from Noki Bay to play. Big deal. But since there's a stale reference with that cutscene due to the player not being in Noki Bay, there's a small matter of what did Noki Doki have the game read data from in place of the shine sprite. And if you guessed the water splash particles when Mario shoots Flood, you'd be correct. We don't need to get into the nitty-gritty details of this interaction, but what's happening at a high level is a splash particle has spawned in memory where the stale reference has occurred, and the game is reading position data from it and executing it as code. Because Noki Doki can manipulate the position of this splash particle with precise stick angles, he can configure its data in such a way that the game reads it as an instruction to set the Bowser fight as the next area to load. And he also sets the current cutscene as the last one to play so the game doesn't start executing garbage data. This way, after the fade out, the game thinks it should load him into the final boss fight instead of Delfino Plaza. And after 5 ground pounds, he's just tasked the game in under 10 minutes. However, this setup had no chance of being performed by a human because it wasn't just a task, it also involved using hacks. The position that he needed the splash particle to spawn into was precise. In fact, it was precise down to a millionth of a unit, which is equivalent to 10 nanometers if we're talking about in-game units. So even with task tools, this position was way too precise to hit reliably, so for this demonstration, Noki Doki opted to hack the splash particle into position. Not content with the skip using hacks, Noki Doki would look into a setup that was pure task only, and eventually he did create a task only version of the skip in 2021. How he solved the precision problem is quite insane, but there are some other changes he made to the setup that are worth looking at first. Before getting to the Eelymouth fight in Noki Bay, he first acquires the fastest 20 shines to unlock Noki Bay itself, and it's worth noting that this is a low optimization tool-assisted demonstration, or LOTAD for short, which is something that's not as highly optimized as a task, as the point of this was to show off that the cutscene underflow was possible without hacks. Once he's entered the Eelymouth fight, he makes sure to have 0 lives, but this time he gets eaten 3 times and then dies while the Shine Spawn cutscene is queued up to play, since a death doesn't count as a cutscene and skipping the Shine Get cutscene itself is a small time save, as it only needs to be loaded in the list and not actually watched. This brings him to Delfino Plaza, where the same blue coin trick is used to get the underflow set up, and next is where the most insane part of the task happens. Remember how the splash particle position was precise down to the millionth of a unit? You'd think in a task that getting this position would be easy, but splash particles spawn at random locations. So even with task tools, getting a position this precise takes an incredible amount of time. Because of this, Noki Doki wrote a program that ran the task over and over until it got the position it needed to succeed. And amazingly, it took an entire 2 weeks before it had a single success. That's a lot of brute forcing. But it was well worth the wait, because this time he's found a way to write a custom code payload into the game's memory by having the game read his joystick angle as data. When you create custom code through an exploit and have the game run it, it's called arbitrary code execution, or ACE for short, and when combined with a stale reference, it's an incredibly powerful glitch. With this newfound power, Noki Doki wouldn't just be warping to the Bowser fight. In addition to the warp, he's also used ACE to edit the number of times he needs to ground pound in the fight from 5 down to 1, making the battle almost instant. This was incredible, but it had a big problem. Speedrunners wouldn't be able to do it in a live setting because of the position requirement for the splash particle. It was just too precise to ever be hit by a human, so this was labeled as a cool task trick. That is, until 2024. In February of 2024, Zeelpikukirby and Sue created a task that did something very different. Aside from doing some cool graffiti in the opening fight, they found a way to completely skip collecting shines to unlock the Eelymouth fight, because it turns out that Delfino Plaza contains all of the cutscenes needed to set up the underflow. The first cutscene they use is during the Shadow Mario kidnapping Peach sequence, where after stunning Shadow Mario, they return to the statue and trigger a blue coin cutscene. Then, they wait for Shadow Mario to paint the M on the statue for number 2, then trigger another blue coin for 3. This leaves the Shine Spawn cutscene they're going to use for the stale reference. So they climb the bell tower and clean it off before ending the level sequence by getting the shine inside of the turbo tower, which brings the cutscene total to 5. Since finishing a level reloads the plaza, the LCE and LCS variables are reset to 0. But they won't be doing the underflow just yet. Instead, they're going to do the setup that lets them skip Noki Bay. As you progress in the game, the state of Delfino Plaza will change, and the version of the plaza that Noki Doki used in his task had memory configured such that the splash particle happened to be what the stale reference pointed to. But Zeelpiku and Sue had a different idea. By collecting a total of 2 shines, the plaza advances to the Rico Harbor unlock state. And while the Piranha Plant is over the Rico Harbor entrance, the game's memory is laid out so that the stale reference will point at a vertex of the turbo gate instead of a splash particle. This eliminates the RNG aspect completely, as the vertex of the turbo gate never moves, and coincidentally, it's in a great spot in memory to manipulate to set up an ACE payload that can be executed. So once the task arrives in the Rico Harbor unlock version of the plaza, the familiar actions of triggering blue coin cutscenes takes place. But you might be wondering, this setup has 5 cutscenes loaded into memory. Does anything bad happen when the game tries to play the 5th cutscene? Recall that underflow offsets the 2 variables due to a shine get cutscene increasing the LCE twice, so it starts playing through cutscenes until it catches back up. In this case, it should reach the 5th cutscene, then proceed into more garbage data, which would result in a crash. But the payload they wrote stops the game from going into the garbage data. This is because the arbitrary code is set up while the game is playing cutscenes, and it executes when the Shine Get cutscene tries to play, as that's when the stale reference becomes active. And since part of the code they created tells the game to stop playing cutscenes, it never gets to the garbage data. There's another difference between this task and Noki Doki's, however. In addition to skipping Noki Bay, this task skips the Bowser fight entirely, as it warps straight to the credits cutscene. So we went from doing a full Bowser fight to doing a single ground pound to bypassing Bowser entirely. This was incredible, but it still left the question of if this new route was possible by humans. And while we wouldn't get an answer right away, in July of 2023, Sue would upload a video explaining a route that was RTA viable. The video goes over the technical requirements in great detail, laying out careful instructions for what actions affect which memory addresses and offers strategies for how they could be performed in an RTA setting. It involves a lot of pause buffering to get specific stick angles, and since it's in another language, it was tough for players in the West to translate it and perform their own runs. But a month later, Sue posted an RTA run using the route. It clocked in at 2 hours and 17 minutes, which is well above the any % record, so you might think that the wrong warp doesn't actually save time. But it's worth pointing out that Sue had to redo multiple parts of the setup due to how finicky the requirements are. But eventually, he succeeds and loads a version of Delfino Plaza that has Corona Mountain unlocked. Because speedrunners don't have the precision of a TAS, getting a warp straight to Bowser or the credits was off the table. So loading Delfino Plaza with Corona Mountain unlocked was the best they could do to reach the end, which left some platforming and then the Bowser fight. While this run wasn't faster than the current any % record, it did show that arbitrary code execution was possible for humans. And just 2 weeks later, a player named Orange would do the unthinkable. During Sue's run, he paused at multiple points so he could look at an emulator to see what memory values he needed to hit next. This resulted in a huge amount of time loss, but Orange took Sue's setup and streamlined it. The any % record stood at 1 hour and 12 minutes, so if the wrong warp was going to be useful, it had to beat that time, and Orange set out to do just that. A lot of this setup is manipulating memory at a very low level in the code, so we won't get into every detail, but how the spin buffer code is written is worth looking at, as it's the crux of how this is possible. The game stores 10 frames worth of the joystick's angles in memory, but since it writes to that memory address 4 times per frame and only reads the controller input once, players need to pause and unpause to make sure the game only writes 1 angle value at a time, which is a painstaking process. To make this easier, the box room is used as it has lots of ledges and helpful angles in its geometry that make getting the necessary stick angles into memory a lot easier, so a lot of the run is spent in here. Aside from that, the setup remains largely the same. Fill the cutscene list, then put the Shine Spawn cutscene at a certain spot, then execute the underflow. This time, they use the 100 coin shine in Delfino Plaza instead of the Turbo Tower shine. And you can see the effects of the stale reference as the shine spawns in, not to mention that Mario isn't even holding a shine as the cutscene plays out. After that, it's a quick trip to Corona Mountain since the Ace payload loaded them into the plaza where the gate is despawned. And when Orange hits the final ground pound on Bowser, the time is a 46:55, almost 30 minutes ahead of the any % record, making this a legitimate skip. Typically, when these types of exploits are found, the leaderboards are changed, as the routes and skills being tested are so different that a separate category is almost always created, and Sunshine wouldn't be an exception. But the story doesn't end here. Orange's run was certainly good, but there was room for improvement. For instance, if any of the stick angle sequences are performed incorrectly, the entire segment needs to be started from scratch. So a single mistake is a huge time loss, and runners in the West weren't going to let Japan have all the fun. So, Jcool took his turn at the new skip. With the only resource being the Japanese runs, he set to the task of translating instructions for how to perform the run. This took a lot of time, as he couldn't copy and paste text from inside of a video, so he copied it all by hand. And after a lot of trial and error, he set a new record of 36:15, over 10 minutes faster than Orange's time. But he wasn't done here, as his run contained mistakes he wanted to correct, and a day later, he set a 31:32. This run was amazing, but Jcool is a perfectionist and wasn't fully satisfied with it since it still contained resets. So 2 days after that, he set the very first run with no resets for a final time of 23:57, the first run ever by a human that beat Sunshine in under 30 minutes. And amazingly, a runner named Ouija would lower the record even further, getting the first sub 20-minute time just 10 days later. This may not be the end of the story, however. It's always possible a setup is found that sends runners right into the Bowser fight or even the credits, which could cut 2 minutes off the run and make a sub 15 record possible. Thanks to Jcool and Noki Doki for help with this video, and I hope to see you in the next exciting episode of Abyssoft Z.